For as long as I can remember, I've been interested in computers, especially old computers from the 80s, like the ZX Spectrum, the Commodore 64, the BBC Micro, and the Atari 8-bit series, and I've wanted to make a computer like that for so long. There's quite a few homebrew microcomputer projects on YouTube, so I'd like to share my plans for the microcomputer I'd like to make. But what is a microcomputer, you may ask? Well, I'd be more than happy to explain. In the late 70s, there were a lot of personal computers that started to pop up, like the Altair 8800, the Apple I, and the Commodore PET. Before these personal computers came about, computers were often huge, expensive, and mainly used by big businesses or universities. Even the PDP-8, which was fairly basic and cheap at the time, was a whopping $18,000, or $170,000 with inflation. It also weighed a back-breaking 113 kilograms and was the size of a standard fridge freezer. A few years later, smaller, cheaper computers popped up, like the ZX Spectrum and VIC-20. These are what I mean when I say microcomputers. They could just be plugged into most standard TVs of the time. They were super popular and got a lot of people into programming. However, these computers were a far cry away from what we have today. They only had a small fraction of the power and the memory of today's computers. It was somewhat rare to see a machine with more than 64 kilobytes of RAM. Also, these computers didn't have any fancy graphic user interfaces like Windows or Linux like we're used to today. The Altair 88000 didn't even come with a monitor as standard. It had these little toggle switches and LED lights to interface with the computer. But what most of these later computers did have was BASIC, or Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, created in 1964. It was an interpretive language that used human-readable commands like print, if then, let, or go to. The alternative to this was machine code, which essentially meant that you had to speak the processor's language directly. This was a difficult skill to learn, and most people found BASIC much easier to learn, although BASIC ran slower than machine code. This actually helped get a lot of people into coding. So now that I've explained a bit about microcomputers, I'll tell you my plans. We'll start with the chip I'll be using. Sorry, those are the wrong kind of chips. Here are some actual chips. All of these processors were used a lot throughout the microcomputer revolution of the 80s. The MOS 6502 was used in the VIC-20, the Commodore 64, and BBC Micro. The Zilog Z80 was used in the Sinclair family, the ZX80, the ZX81 and the ZX Spectrum, and the Amstrad CPC. And the Motorola 6800 was used in the Dragon computers and the TRS-80. Because the 6502 was so popular, it has a wealth of very detailed information on it, and it's still manufactured to this day, so I'm going to use that. There are a few options in terms of how to generate video output, so that the computer can be used with a standard TV. The Commodore series generally use their own purpose-built video processors, like the VIC and the VIC-2 chips. However, there were some off-the-shelf chips as well, such as the Motorola 6847. That was used in the Dragon 32 and the TRS-80. There was even a method to use the CPU to generate video signal, which was used by the ZX80. It did take up a lot of the CPU's time, but it was cheap and simple, and since I have very little electronic experience, I think I'm going to use this option. I'm probably going to use an 8KB RAM chip. It's not a lot, but I want to keep things simple. I'm also going to use 4KB of ROM, and that ROM will be used to store a version of BASIC called Tiny Basic. As the name implies, it's quite small, and it doesn't have as many features as some of the other basics, but it'll do. Also, in the 80s, games and software was stored on cassette tapes, which is quite amusing really, but that's just what was cheap and accessible at the time. And ROM chips were quite expensive, so cartridge games were used a lot less. I've already got the 6502 microprocessor. I just need to get RAM and ROM and a bunch of different components like shift registers, counter circuits, and a variety of logic gates. This is to build the video circuitry. I'll also need some sort of input system. And finally, a breadboard to build it all on. Breadboards are boards with holes in them that connect components together. They're really good for prototyping. I'm not sure when I'll get round to building this, but hopefully at some point in the future. But I just wanted to show my plans for now. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please like and subscribe, and comment what you think of the plans, and I'll see you next time.